Hi, my name is Avantika Chitturi.
My name is Emily Choi.
My name is Georgia Kerr.
My name is Emily Hamill.
My name is Isabel Chen.
And my name is Alexander Flores, and we will be reading A Question of Karma by Julia Halprin Jackson. They had called a meeting without her. Fran sat at the dining room table in the 3-bedroom house on Bernal Hill where she'd lived for the past year, staring down 3 of her 4 housemates. There had been so much intention in this house, they explained. Remember when they'd agreed to set up a joint bank account to make paying rent that much easier? Or when they'd created the shared meal plan with designated shoppers and chore penalties? They even had been kind enough to adjust rent based on monthly income, rather than split it evenly because they were just that progressive. The house was built in the early 20th century and updated before the 5 of them had moved in. 2 attic bedrooms, 1 set of steep stairs, a bedroom on the bottom floor, a spacious dining room / living room / dance space, a garage, and a basement. And that view, a row of fenced-in backyards cascading down Bernal Hill towards the Mission. And beyond that, Twin Peaks. Fran had been living with her parents when Wren and Marian had located the house on the hill. She'd been scouring Craigslist for apartments until Wren had pointed out that if they had enough people, it would make more sense to rent a house. Seems like a grown-up thing to do. Marianne's actor boyfriend Kip joined the crew, while Wren recruited Kira, a friend of a friend who looked cool on Facebook. Marianne and Wren found the remodeled home, and Fran, trusting their judgment, agreed to move in, sight unseen. The initial problem was the deposit. More money than any of them had ever made in a month. The leasing agent would only rent it to the 5 recent college grads if they could get their parents to sign on as well. To Fran, it didn't seem worth it. Wasn't the point that they were on their own? Wren, however, had insisted.
You just have to see this place, Fran. It has good juju.
And so Fran talked it over with her parents, who reluctantly agreed. She already owed them for paying for her health insurance until she found a job that offered benefits. They said it was fine, but she was all too aware of the privilege they offered her. Without their help, she would have to work at least 80 hours a week to afford both health insurance and rent.
If this is what you need, we will support you,
They had said. Fran didn't like asking for help, and she lived every day looking for ways to prove that she was worthy of their trust. It was 2009, a few months into the Great Recession that made Fran's job search that much more challenging. She was caught in that space between college and real, honest-to-God adult life, an era measured in $2 chuck, her burned Annie DiFranco CD on repeat while she scrolled through ads for editorial assistants and blind dates. Sometimes she'd even score an interview, only to be told that she lacked experience. The most common response was none at all. 23 years old, and Fran was amazed of how much adulthood was unexplained and how effortless other people made it all seem. Her housemates knew that Fran was juggling 2 part-time jobs and 2 unpaid internships because she was still, quote-unquote, figuring it out. They watched her pull her mom's second-hand 18-speed bicycle out of the garage every morning en route to the Women's Museum on the Embarcado, where she worked without pay until 3 p.m. They heard her open the garage close to midnight after returning from closing shifts at the Chinatown Starbucks. They noticed when she missed the Saturday morning farmers market trips because she was proctoring SATs. They didn't see the hours she spent copywriting for a literary magazine, not for pay, but for the promise that its celebrated editor would write her a letter of recommendation for graduate school. They did, however, notice her crumbs on the dining room table after midnight, where she'd stay up late with a GRE prep book from the library, writing vocabulary words on index cards because it had worked when she was in high school. They complained about the sound of her steps as she trudged upstairs to the attic bedroom she shared with Wren. Didn't she know they were sleeping? They were miffed when she turned down their invitations to see Black Alicious or Hot Chips at the Orpheum Museum because she couldn't get off work, failing to see that if she had gone, they would have to cut into her contributions to the house food allowance. Heaven forbid, they noticed when she took home day-old croissants that wouldn't sell.
We understand that you're trying to be charitable,
Said Marian, her long face trying to hide a sneer.
but Fran, we agreed that ours is a vegan household, right? And don't get me started on the unsustainable practices at Starbucks.
Under her breath, loud enough so Fran could hear, but not so loud that it was up for discussion.
Unconscionable.
You know that they're not free trade,
Said Kira. She worked as a marketing assistant in a nonprofit that supported independent businesses. She'd been there 3 whole years, a seeming eternity.
You should read that article about them in The Nation.
I think it was NPR.
Marianne corrected. She had landed a job at a boutique advertising firm and sent Fran friendly emails 3 to 4 times a week with links to listicles with headlines like how to dress professionally on a budget or discovering your inner you, one yoga pose at a time. At long last, Wren spoke up, pulling open the curtain of her red hair.
I think she was just trying to be economical, right, Fran?
She smiled. Wren and Fran had met in college, where they had bonded over a shared love for Latin American music and absurdist theater. Wren had a contented air about her, a quiet introspection, an intense curiosity and intellect. She wrote questions for test prep companies and tutored wealthy teenagers in Pacific Heights, and stayed up late writing plays on her MacBook. Fran envied her friend's drive and demonstrated skill. She'd already produced 2 plays through a playwriting lab in the Mission SF Weekly, had tweeted out a link for her first show. And there we were, which was about a couple debating existentialism while hiking in the Andes. The Black Box Theater had sold out. Fran never did tell Wren how she'd had to forego an entire night's pay to make opening night. It seemed like a minor sacrifice to attend her friend's theatrical debut. Besides, it would look bad if she were the only housemate to miss it. There was no doubting Wren's dedication to her craft. It helped that she didn't have to cobra her health insurance and had inherited her father's black Saab. Green as she was, she used it to pick up house groceries.
Actually, I like the croissants, and they're fine to eat.
Fran said.
The policy is to hold them for 3 days, but if no one buys them after 2, we run out of room in the display case.
Marian and Kira exchanged a knowing look. Kira pulled her laptop out of her messenger bag. Wren shifted in her seat, not meeting Fran's eyes. Wren had been avoiding her, though she'd never copped to it. Whereas months ago, the two of them would take meandering bike rides through Golden Gate Park on their rare days off together. Now, Wren always had an excuse. She and Marian liked to do all the house shopping together, overlooking Fran's request for lower-cost products in favor of all organic, locally sourced produce that was delicious, but took a significant bite out of Fran's paycheck.
We took the liberty of creating an agenda for tonight's meeting.
Marian said.
We know how busy you are, and we didn't want to waste a lot of time emailing back and forth. Hope you don't mind.
Fran did mind. They'd been sharing the house on Anderson Street for several months, and she still couldn't remember all the rules. She eyed the corkboard above Wren's head, where they'd pinned the Good Karma House Manifesto, a proclamation that they'd written late one night, drunk on Krumpnikas, a distilled Lithuanian liquor gifted from Fran's college friend. Kip had been there that night, a rare occurrence, since his shifts at the bar back at the restaurant down the hill went in to the wee hours of the morning. Funny, wasn't it? How no one ever seemed to complain when he got home late and slipped upstairs to Marianne's bed in the room opposite of Fran and Wren. Fran had assumed the manifesto to be an inside joke, something they'd reference years from now.
Remember when we'd said that no one could bring butter into our kitchen?
It appeared that her housemates had something else in mind. Between her internship at the museum, where she translated archives from Spanish to English, her nights closing the cafe, and her Saturdays proctoring in the test prep center beneath the Transamerica Tower, Fran rarely responded to house emails. And how many 20-somethings wrote agendas for house meetings? She knew better than to voice any of these reactions, though. To do so would unleash one of Marianne's lectures about how their house was different, that she'd agreed to this. Read the fine print. Kira opened her laptop and started scrolling.
I forget, was it version 2 or version 3, Marian?
Before Marianne could respond, Wren said.
Version 4, I had an edit on 3.
Fran blinked. They'd had enough free time to workshop an agenda for a meeting that she hadn't known had been called. What was it this time? She knew that the croissants weren't enough to warrant all this effort. Maybe she'd eaten more than her share of the house trail mix. Had she served them dinner a half hour later than promised? Did she forget to buy ghee?
I'd like to see the agenda, please,
she said. Marianne rolled her eyes, but Kira obliged, turning the laptop so Fran could see its blinking face. She rubbed her eyes, already drained. She didn't have an evening shift tonight, which was how they'd managed to corner her in the dining room. She put her hand on the laptop's touchpad and tried to click, but nothing happened.
You have to slide your finger across it?
Wren explained, showing her with an index finger.
Oh, right.
Said Fran.
Thanks.
She had been saving up for a laptop, but still used the massive desktop that she bought with scholarship money as a college freshman. She squinted at Wren's screen, which read,
Agenda for the Good Karma House meeting. Discuss recipes for next week. 2. Workshop ideas for chore wheels. 3. Review Fran's top 10 list for ideas for Marian's 25th in March.
The agenda went on. Something about a house garden or proposing community service. Fran's eyes stopped at item 3.
Fran's top 10 list?
She asked,
What's this?
Well, technically that's item 3, but I guess we can start there.
said Marian.
I think Wren has something to say on the subject.
Wren? Her friend who had once joked that they spent so much time together that they should change their Facebook status to married? Wren picked at her cuticles.
We all love you, Fran. You know that.
Duh.
Kira said with an exaggerated dopey grin. Marianne raised her eyebrows. Fran waited, her pulse quickening.
There are just a few things that we think you could, work on.
Wren's cuticles looked red and raw.
I mean, we all have stuff to work on, and we thought that maybe we could just start with, you.
Fran stared at the corkboard alongside the house manifesto, which Kira had printed at work and stained with lemon juice to make it look old. There was a tally of groceries, a beer budget, and Polaroids from their housewarming party last spring. Who were those people?
It would be great if you could be more mindful of your footfalls when you come upstairs,
Said Kira.
I know we've talked about this before, but you're not, any quieter.
Fran looked at her feet. She was 5'10" and wore size 10 shoes. Her backpack was full to the brim, bursting with extra clothes and Tupperware from packed lunches and dinners. More so on days where she worked multiple gigs.
I don't know what I can do about that.
She said.
I leave my backpack downstairs and try not to carry anything up when I get home.
Maybe you could just, walk slower or quieter, something less loud.
Kira said. Kira reminded her of a shivering chihuahua, standing 5 feet with long black hair.
Another thing.
Said Marianne, pressing her palms together underneath her chin, as if what she was going to say next took absolute focus.
You like to have friends over on weekends. They like to eat. When they visit, can you get your own groceries to share with them, since the food we buy is for our house?
I mean, it's okay if they have, an apple or something.
Said Wren, watching Fran's expression.
That's no big deal. But maybe if they want a meal, you could go out or buy your own stuff.
Kendra and Jim were here last weekend, and you had a huge Friendsgiving meal.
Fran said. Marianne's high school friends liked to joke that they lived in San Francisco on weekends. They tended to edge in a little too close to Fran as they talked and enjoyed sharing their gritty details of their polyamorous arrangement.
Friendsgiving is different.
Marianne said.
I mean, it's in the word, isn't it?
Fran looked at her.
Aren't I your friend?
The dining room was still. Fran could hear the sighing tires of the 24 bus coming up Cortlandt. Outside, sunset approached, and the clouds lit up with a yellow glow as fog began to roll in over the hill. How hard she worked to afford that view. It didn't seem worth it now.
Of course you're our friend.
Wren reached out a hand.
That's why we feel we can be honest with you.
Fran pulled away.
So that's 2 things. There are 8 more?
Marianne fixed a strand of hair behind an ear and exhaled.
This will go faster if we just read it to you.
Kira handed her the laptop, its glow radiating off Marianne's pale skin. They hadn't turned on the overhead light, and now that the sun was setting, all Fran could focus on was that eerie blue-white shine. It cast a chill over the room. Marianne cleared her throat.
Number 3, you need to vary the recipes you choose. Potatoes don't belong in stir fry. 4, watch the volume of your voice. Sometimes when Kip and I are playing video games in the living room, we can hear you on the phone in the kitchen.
And what about the volume of their video games? Fran wanted to ask, but she didn't. Marianne's voice sped up, as if she were just realizing how she sounded.
5, we've talked about this, but remember to split the compost between regular and vermicompost. We want to keep our worms happy.
She continued.
6, please respond to house emails within 48 hours. It helps us plan ahead. 7, please limit house guests to 2 people per month. 8, if you bike home after 11 o'clock, please lock your bike outside. Don't open the garage door, it's too loud. 9, there are 2 bathrooms in our house. We know you like to use our Dr. Bronner soap, which is totally fine, but maybe you could keep your daily use down to 1 to 2 tablespoons. We're going through it super fast, and your hair has the most, volume.
Fran touched her hair, long and thick and tied in a massive top knot.
Would you like me to measure out my 2 tablespoons? Or do you prefer to dole it out every day, to make sure I'm not taking too much?
No one seemed to get the joke.
Please, sir, may I have some more?
She held her hands out as if she were begging, then turned to Wren and said,
Can you believe this bullshit?
A year ago, when they were neighbors in their college co-op, they would have laughed over the absurdity of this exchange. Wren would have written a skit about the severity of Dr. Bronner's soap that they would have performed at their favorite coffee shop's open mic night. And then they would have forgotten about it. But Wren wasn't laughing. She wasn't looking at Fran. One of her cuticles was now bleeding, so she put the finger in her mouth. Fran snorted.
Oh, wait. Was this your edit to the third version, Wren? Dr. Bronner's?
No, that was me.
said Kira.
And you don't need to be a dick about it. We're just trying to be constructive.
Oh, right.
Fran was a little delirious.
Thank you for the self-improvement tips. What's Kip think of all this, dare I ask? Does this meeting meet house quorum?
Kip agrees with us.
Marianne folded her arms over her chest, biceps flexed. She did push-ups first thing every morning.
He couldn't make it tonight, but he saw the agenda.
Oh?
Fran asked.
He's out with Kendra and Jim again? Didn't invite you this time?
Marianne sniffed.
He had work.
Convenient.
Fran smiled. The sun had set. It was Thursday. Kira had made mashed potatoes and veggie burgers for house dinner an hour early, but they still hadn't moved from the dining room to the kitchen. The food would be cold by now.
There's one more thing.
Marianne said.
It was Wren's suggestion.
Fran looked at her friend, betrayal rising like mercury from her head to her feet. Wren, who had once written her handwritten letters on her birthday and had pinned up a world map in their shared room with sticky notes on all the countries that they had planned to visit together. Wren, to whom Fran had always wanted to be considered an equal. Before they had moved to San Francisco, before they had finished their degrees with the same majors and the same GPAs, Fran and Wren used to sneak into their college lecture rooms at 2 a.m. to play Gabriele Rodrigo and ride until morning. It was on one of those late nights that they'd pinky promised to create their own community of artists, some place where they could surround themselves in the capital letter art. Fran had no idea that this vision would be reduced to soap, footfalls, or worms. Wren looked at her.
You're always so chatty when you're home.
Wren said.
When you come home, you just want to talk to people, and we don't always want to talk to you back.
Fran blinked.
You don't want me to talk to you?
Not at all.
Wren said.
You're too cheerful.
Too cheerful.
You always want to high five, and we don't always want to do that.
Said Kira, as if this better explained things. She should have seen this coming. She should have put two and two together on all those late nights when Wren and Marianne and Kira had wandered down to the Wild Slide bar for beers while Fran labored through GRE practice test. She noticed that Wren no longer invited her to cook with her, preferring to dream up vegan feasts with Kira and take over the kitchen counters with marinated tofu, homemade kombucha, and almond butter maple syrup cookies. Fran had asked her to read her 500-word personal statement for grad school 3 weeks ago, and Wren had said she was too busy. Not busy enough, it seemed, to critique Fran's personality. She no longer had an appetite. She didn't want to sit at the table with people who pretended to be her friends. She approached the kitchen.
Where are you going?
There was a small catch in Wren's voice.
It's my night to wash the dishes, yeah?
Fran didn't turn around as she began packing the night's dinner, still uneaten, into Pyrex dishes and ceiling lids. She scraped the crusty bottom of the pan in the kitchen sink.
You can't wash the dishes before we've eaten,
said Marianne.
Nobody has touched their potato mash.
Wonder why that is.
Fran no longer cared about the tone of her voice. She used a knife to swipe leftover pieces of kale and broccoli off a cutting board into a ceramic bowl that they used for compost, changing her mind at the last minute and throwing it all into the trash. It felt good. She hated kale.
Don't be weird.
Kira closed her laptop and walked to the kitchen, grabbing one of the Pyrex before Fran could put it in the fridge.
Just trying not to be cheerful.
Fran forced a laugh.
Meeting adjourned, eh? I'm going to study.
She pushed past Wren without looking at her, grabbed her bag, and stomped upstairs to her room, slamming her feet into each step with relish. She heard Marianne call.
We didn't get to talk about my 25th birthday.
Once upstairs, she shut the door and slid down the wall until she was huddled in the triangular corner of the attic. Cloaked in darkness, the attic felt like Fran, once airy, now bleak, cramped, shoved out of the way. She loved how much life San Francisco squeezed in between neighborhoods, how many different kinds of people lived and worked here. Why, then, did her world feel so small? She was too much. They wanted her to be smaller, more compact. They wanted her to take up less space, make less noise. While Marianne's and Kira's words stung, she had learned to expect their cruelty, often couched in good intentions. But Wren? She felt a lump in her throat. She had thought Wren was different. She had thought Wren liked her more than that, respected her enough to let her be herself. Not long after they had moved in, the five of them were cleaning out the basement when Fran found a manila envelope that had slipped between the boards of an old futon. The envelope contained clippings about the house's first owner, Charlotte Manson, who had founded a charitable organization following the San Francisco earthquake in 1906. She continued to volunteer well into her 80s, often opening up her home for runways. Inspired by her legacy, the housemates decided to name their new home the Good Karma House. Kira created a screen print design for house shirts, which they wore without irony. Whenever they talked about becoming an intentional community, Fran remembered Charlotte's generosity and respect for her neighbors. Fran got off the floor and walked to her side of the bedroom, where she had tacked a copy of Charlotte's obituary. It included a picture of Charlotte leaning against the doorframe of her house, a box of apples in her arms. Barely visible were the hands on either side of her, reaching for apples. The caption read,
For Miss Mason, everyone is deserving of help. Am I deserving, Charlotte?
She asked the photograph.
Or am I too much?
She waited in the darkness for a few moments, thinking that she heard Wren hesitating on the landing outside their room. Maybe she'd apologize, say she'd given in to Marian and Kira, and clarify that Fran wasn't the problem. It was a question of timing. And yet Fran knew Wren too well to know that this wouldn't happen. They had shared a few square feet for the better part of a year. When Wren chose her words, she chose them with intention. She was a writer. Still, Fran waited, wanting to be wrong. She held her breath when she heard someone trudging up the stairs, but it was Kip. Had he ever even been at work? Fran took one last look at Charlotte's obituary and ripped it off the wall, tearing the paper to shreds. It felt good to destroy something. She pulled a duffel bag out of her closet and began tossing clothes inside, filled with new feelings. Freedom? Relief? She could leave. She should leave. It was obvious. Why was she still here? Fran thundered down the stairs, grinding her heels into each step. Downstairs, Marian and Wren were decanting a bottle of $25 Malbec, purchased with house money, while Kira banged about in the kitchen, brewing something that smelled like kombucha or homegrown tea. Fran helped herself to a Ziploc bag of organic trail mix and hesitated for a half-second before swiping the Krupnikas off the shelf.
What's wrong with you?
Kira asked, stirring her concoction on the stove.
And where are you going with the house liquor?
Fran didn't answer. She stuffed the bottle in her backpack and threw back a handful of trail mix. They didn't deserve an explanation. All of this was just as much hers as it was theirs. Before she walked out the front door, she cast one last glance around the house, taking in the rugs they'd bought a Mission Thrift and the album covers of records Wren had found at the flea market but never listened to. The house was built on pretense.
Where are you going?
Wren called, voice small in the long hallway. Fran smiled.
Home.
When she shut the door behind her, the lock gave a satisfying click. She'd have to come back for her computer and her bike, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was getting out of that house and onto the 24 bus, watching the blue house on the hill grow even smaller as the bus wound its way to Presida Park, down to Van Ness, to Mission, where she hopped on BART to Richmond and grabbed the last Amtrak train home to her parents. They weren't expecting her, but they answered when she called from the depot, and when she told them about the top 10 list, they sighed, looking at each other and said, "We're so glad you left." Almost as if they saw this coming, as if they had prepared for this moment and were ready with open arms to welcome her home. Because what was home if it wasn't a place to be yourself? Fran didn't return to San Francisco until she had found a new room to rent. She called and talked to the two roommates, both men, one an Italian engineer in grad school and the other an executive assistant at Google whose boyfriend had accepted a fellowship in Germany. They sent her some pictures and assured her that there was no shared bank account, no house manifesto, just a small room at the end of the apartment, which was perched above a Chinese restaurant.
Can you pay rent?
They asked.
Yes.
She said.
You seem sane.
They said.
Call us when you're back in the city. And hey, looks like you won't have to go far. Your application says you live at 456 Anderson. We're on 450. Ours is the one with the fire escape.
Fran smiled, thinking how pissed Marian would be to know she was moving a few doors down.
Easy peasy.